Sometimes I refer to myself as golden delicious. Sometimes a cocktail, maybe beige, brown, mixed race if I'm being sensible. I try to say mixed race.
If I'm feeling out of form or something like that, I tend to like pick mixed race or mixed other. But if like having a conversation with someone, then I'll say like I'm half Chinese, half Nigerian, because it just makes it easier to say exactly where you're from, and then they can make whatever.
As I got to understand who I really was, that I did come across quite a few people who had problems with the colour of the skin, and whether they be black or white or Turkish or mixed race, because I tried to explain to them about, you know, being who they are, to being comfortable in your own skin. So yes, I have spoke to a lot of people that have had lots of problems where they didn't quite fit.
You feel like you don't really belong, like you don't have a place that you can claim, as some other people do. Like if you're just like fully English or whatever, you can like just absorb that full English heritage and just be whatever, identify with that completely. But whenever you have two, it's hard to identify with one, because you can only really split half of your identity with that place. So there is a feeling of like kind of limbo in terms of like your culture and identity. So
I think once you have brown skin and you live in a white country, you're always gonna have an affinity with those that have to experience what you have to experience. And those that don't experience it often struggle to comprehend the pressures involved in being a visual minority.
I think it's largely down to like what you look like, what your skin tone is, which will determine how people treat you. Because let's say you're mixed race, like white passing, you're gonna have a different experience to someone who's mixed race but still like dark. You know what I mean? So you need to be aware in every situation how you're gonna be perceived. And I know that I'm perceived as a black person, right? So I need to know what context that gives to the situation in any given interaction. So that's something that I think more generally like minorities need to deal with.
Well, growing up, we had it all, and you know, there's every kind of term. There was half caste was a long time, you know, and that one, you know, is quite offensive. Mixed race has been the one that's stuck since I've been young, and it doesn't seem to cause offence to the majority of people I've ever met. Any mixed race person has found themselves comfortable with that term, mostly. I'm not going to generalize, but mostly in my experience. So I'm quite comfortable in its non-offensiveness. Even though if you want to look into a term and you want to intellectualize a term, it can be quite easily could cause offence. But for some reason, it doesn't seem to have that hit in amongst people's minds of my generation. It could be different for the next generation, just like at one time half caste didn't seem to offend too many people. Some people were quite comfortable with it. So maybe it's just one of those terms that's always going to grow. It's always going to develop with our consciousness, and as we grow and we learn more about ourselves. Because I think being mixed race is a learning process, because it's it's a recent development culturally. It's obviously always been around, but in such huge numbers, you know, driving like populations in England. So I think as the population grows, so will the consciousness around our terminology.
With social media and stuff, there's a lot of people like pushing more black positive images that I know that I personally would never have seen if it wasn't for social media, because I know I didn't see it at school. I know I don't see it on TV. So I think it's good because people are getting to express their voices, which you wouldn't have heard before, a lot more now. So in a way, I think the door is open for more diversity, even though, well, basically the major media is having less of an impact now than it was before. So.
I think for me personally, it's kind of felt like people have always told me who I am. People have always popped me in a box. They've always, you know, tried to describe my experiences for me. But but I think maybe there'll be more of a voice from people of mixed heritage, one that might be listened to. So yeah, I guess just becoming more common, and yeah, hopefully it will be about people defining themselves more, rather than, oh, there's this really unique bunch of mixed race people, you know. Well, actually, we'll sort of discuss identity and everything together, because I think the mixed experience is probably no different to, you know, somebody who's black, you know, physically black, growing up in a predominantly white area, where, you know, they might eat pie and mash every day or something. You know, it's just that, how do they define themselves? It's similar to the sort of mixed experience, where it's like we just have different parts of who we are. You know, being in my first secondary school, the group of friends that I had, it was, yeah, very much, I was sort of allowed into that group because I didn't, you know, I wasn't too dark, I wasn't that black in their eyes, so that was quite significant for me, and just changed how I viewed myself, changed who I associated with, and made me think a lot more about what that meant. And even still today, if I'm in discussions with, you know, a group of black friends, and it's, yeah, but you're mixed, you know, it's always, I can't really have an opinion because I'm half white. Things like that. I think it doesn't matter who I'm with, it's people always sort of feel that they can say to me, oh yeah, but you can't, you know, you wouldn't really see it that way because you're half white, half black. So that, I think, always makes me think, but what, I can't have half opinions on things, or I can't view things, you know, as a half black, half white person, because I'm a whole. But that's, for me, I've just developed a more sort of sense of who I am. It doesn't matter how other people want to define me. I can still have a view on things. So it's every day, really. Yeah, I'm aware.
Yeah, I'll give an example of one of the experiences that was quite negative. Well, I had it a few times. In nightclubs, it seemed to happen that when I was in the toilets, you would be there by yourself with maybe a bunch of girls. Girls would just be like, is that real? And like just silly things, and take your contact lenses out, and, oh, you think you're so nice, all of that type of thing, which I never had before, because I think Leeds has a culture where that's kind of the norm. I don't know if it is anymore, but when I first went to university there, some people, it was generally the black girls were not too kind to me, but it was only a jealous thing, because maybe their hair was, I don't know, I don't really know why it happened, but that's the only really negative thing I've experienced.
It was funny, sometimes you hear someone go, oh, that black son, oh, sorry, Mick, and I really get annoyed about that, you know, like, it was like, really used to upset me, that, and I really didn't like that remarks where they'd like be talking and turn around and say, that black so-and-so, or, did you see him, and then they go, oh, sorry, Mick, I never met, and I'd be thinking, why am I standing in this group?
And there is something that makes me feel a bit negative about being mixed race sometimes. Well, not about me being mixed race, but so many men are like, oh yeah, I'd just go out with mixed race girls. And I think, well, that's a bit strange. And they wouldn't be coming near me if that was their attitude.
One interesting thing, though, that I have is that because, I'm guessing I've tried to psychoanalyze myself as to what the reason is here, but I personally can't see Asian women in a romantic way, and obviously that's odd because, you know, of my family and whatnot. But I think it's partly because my own experience with Asian women has been family. I don't know any Asian women in my social life, so there's this weird dissociation there that a lot of people don't get. I don't really get it, but
my relationships have always been with black males, but I actually started to think a lot about it because they saw me, I would say, differently to how I saw myself. So like I said, I identify as a black female of mixed heritage, but I always find that it's difficult in relationships, I'd say, when, you know, having discussions about, say, black issues, and it's always like, yeah, but you're mixed. So it's like you almost have to justify why you can identify how you do and talk about certain things. So I think for me that is an element of, I don't know, maybe I've been with the wrong people. But yeah, it's difficult because people always want to define who you are. So that, you know, does affect the relationship, I think.
And a lot of the girls, well, not say a lot of the girls, a few of them would say, oh, you can't come round and knock at my door. My dad don't like black people. Or you can't come to my house because my brother goes mad. And, you know, yes, there was times. And I remember a time which I'd like to tell you about. Is, a girlfriend that I met, and she said, oh, can you say that you're Spanish or Italian? Because I look that sort, I could be Greek, bubble, you know, as I say, they call me a bubble. I would be anything. So, and she went, oh, would you say that you're from Spain or something? And I went, yeah, all right. But I didn't. At the dinner table, Dad was like the head of the table, came, oh, so Mickey, where does your mum and dad come from? Well, my dad's Jamaican. And then it went silent, so, you know, I didn't abide to certain rules. But yeah, there was times when I had to, but once I got to that situation where they go, oh, Marv, I go, well, fair enough, if you can't talk about me, see you later, and I'm gone. And that was it.
I grew up in a small town. It was a very small town, like a village, and me and my brother were the only mixed race children in that village until my cousins came and lived in there as well. So my experiences were, I didn't really know I was different at that point, but everyone used to say to me, oh, look at her hair all the time, and I was thinking, oh, what's this about? And have you been on holiday? All the time. I was thinking, why does everyone think I've been on holiday? But yeah, it was, I didn't realise I was different, didn't even realise that mum and dad were different until I'd got a bit older. My cousins came, and then everyone knew that we were the same family, and that sort of made me think, oh, they know we're all the same family because we're all brown. And then I realised. So growing up there, I never had any racism, even though you would think in a small town with only a few people, being brown, you maybe would, but no, it was all positive as a child.
I kind of feel like maybe my generation of mixed race is one of the first where there was quite a lot of us. For us growing up, it felt like we was kind of the first big cohort of mixed race people. And I grew up with parents that were quite aware of identity as an issue from a young age, and being comfortable and confident in your own identity. So I always felt quite comfortable with myself, and I was quite aware of how many other young mixed race people weren't comfortable with their identity. And I always kind of felt like I had a group of mixed race people under my wing at school, and trying to teach them some stuff that they might not have known. It might be because they didn't know their dads, or just because their parents weren't as savvy when it comes to identity and how much of a role it plays in like your formative years. So I had a good experience. I'm quite proud of being mixed race. I'm quite proud of the generation I've grown up in. I kind of want to be like a bit of a leader for what I feel is lacking in regards to maybe some infrastructure for the huge generation of young mixed race people that have grown up in this country, especially.
To talk about mixed race, for me, I'm 64 years of age, and in my day I thought it strange for me because I didn't realise that there was so much when I was younger, but as I got into school things started to change. One of the things that did stick out in my mind was that my family, my dad being the first black man to go into an estate in Kennington next to the Elephant and Castle. So we was the first black family to arrive. So it was, there is lots of things that was strange for me.
In terms of what I noticed maybe different, I guess, is that people would always be surprised that my mum was my mum. So obviously to me, she's just my mum, I don't know any different. But whenever we go somewhere, like, people would always be surprised. They would, well, firstly, you'd like notice a look of puzzlement as to like, what's the story? Like, is she the nanny? Is he adopted or whatever, right? Like, recently my friend came round to my house, yeah, and I told him that my mum was Chinese, but he obviously thought I was lying. Then when she came down, he was like, who's that? I'm like, it's my mum. And he's like, I thought it was a maid. I'm like, firstly, that's a bit rude, but secondly, but anyway, whatever.
I don't mind if you call me mixed race. I identify as black. I would say that I identify as black with mixed heritage. And I would say that's probably because of my experiences growing up. And I would say because as a youngster, I probably wanted to think, okay, so it's negative being black, although I'm very light-skinned. So there was almost that element of, but you're okay because you're not too black. That used to get said to me a lot. And I started to question that, I think probably around 12. And I started to think, actually, it's not right. And my brother had a big influence in it because that was his subject, race, politics, sociology. So he was a big influence in how I started to think about myself. And I started to think, actually, how I identify, how I feel, or who I see myself as, that's something that I want to get to know more of. And my friendship group became predominantly black, and I think that's where it started to develop, and I became more comfortable with who I was. And I didn't want to fit into white groups that actually would be, oh, you're okay because you're not too black. That didn't sit comfortable with me anymore.
I've got mixed race brothers and sisters. I've got white sisters, white brothers, mixed race sisters, mixed race brothers. We're all different colours, and it was interesting other people's perception of us, because we had this kind of like just colour blind attitude, but we was aware that people would look at us and be like, that's a weird family, because there were so many different mixes. There was one time actually I went to Ramsgate with my little brother and we were on the beach front, and at the top, if you know Ramsgate, there's this big cliff face, and at the top there was loads of kids up there, and they were shouting out, they were saying Paki, shouting out Paki to us, and we were quite far away. And I thought, they're not shouting, they can't be saying that to us. There's no way they couldn't. I thought, nah. And then Christian was like, what are they saying? I'm like, nothing. Then they started running down the stairs. And I'm like, Christian, run. There was enough of them. It's like, but at least get your racial terms right. If you're going to call us something, get it right at least. But, you know, racism's racism. Obviously, they don't care. Ignorance, that's the true definition of ignorance.
My dad always used to tell me stories about his life growing up in Peterborough, when him and his brother were the black children in the school where everybody else was white, and he did have a lot of racism when he was younger. And he'd tell me about when he used to fight all the time. I mean, the teachers thought he was really, like, you know, wild as a child, but he wasn't. He was just an emotional character who just believed in being equal. So he used to get in loads of fights. He'd have to stand up for himself all the time, and he used to stand up for his little brother as well. And it's hard to hear when you're little. And as a child, of thinking, well, there's no difference between you and mum. Why did you have such a hard upbringing? My mum, she grew up on RAF camps, so she's always been with different types of people all the time, and so she's never really mentioned differences either when we were younger. And so yeah, they dealt with it by just treating us as we were just the same as everyone else. Well, we are the same as everyone else.
My mum and dad split up when I was very young, and I think primarily it was all to do with colour, because my mum was white and my dad was black, and I think they must have had a hard time in the 1951s My mum left me when I was 18 months of age, so but what I hear from people is that my mum was did like sort of just leave, and that was it. So I was brought up by my dad. So I was always, that's why I was always felt disjointed, because I didn't have a mum either, so it was even worse for me.
When I was growing up, I was never aware of how much of an impact my birth may have had in regards to it being a mixed race child in these two families from different cultures. My mum's English, proper East End Cockney, born and raised within Bow Bells, the whole lot of them, and my dad's from Guyana, West Indies. And I didn't, growing up, because I had so much love from all of my family, I was really blessed and quite close with the extended family as well as the immediate family. I really didn't have any concept that actually at that time when it happened, there could have been people that weren't happy with this, because all they've ever done is shower me with love. But as I've grown older and, you know, conversations become more adult and you kind of get told stories and you get informed about what happened, I was the first black child in this lineage of white working class families. And it's a beautiful thing in a lot of ways, because my granddad on my mum's side, he recently passed away. And before he passed away, we had like a little bit of a heart to heart. And he was in his hospital in Homerton, and he said he could never have dreamed that he'd be on his deathbed having this conversation with his grandson, who's a 6'3" mixed race guy. And yeah, it meant a lot. It was we both had a little bit of a crying, called each other soppy, and but it meant a lot. It really did. And coming from where he came from, you know, growing up in the Blitz and in the war, and he'd tell you his war stories, you can imagine why it would have been so difficult for him to conceive of having these black grandchildren 50 years later, 60 years later, and loving them so much. And all we got was love. We got pure love. But I know from my mum's stories and that it wasn't all love when it happened. It was, you know, it was a big impact on their family and their expectations of what their daughter should or shouldn't do. And they came to terms with it.
My parents told me about being equal. They brought me up, they really did bring me up in a way that made me self-confident, which is what everybody needs, whether you're mixed race, whether you're whatever race you are. But I think if you are that type of person, you will just sail through, hopefully. It's who you encounter. If I was in a different place, perhaps, not a little village, I may have encountered different people who didn't have the same ideas as me and didn't feel the same about mixed race people. I know my friend, a very close friend, she grew up in Scarborough, a little town near Scarborough called Pickering, and her experiences are totally different from mine, yet we were both in a small village. For example, her mum would be pushing the pushchair around, and they'd be like, whose child is that? Like, they wouldn't even think that it could be her child. And so her experience was different.
But my mother was a white woman who was educated, listened to black music, if you like, you know, her reggae collection was huge. All her friendship groups were black and brown. So I think that also kind of helped me see people who looked like me, because obviously when I was young, like I said, I sort of came to her and said, why did you marry a black man? Because people were calling me names, but also because she didn't look like me. So it was kind of like that started to make me think about, well, I'm different to my mum. But my mum, you know, she embraced and sort of helped me and my brother, I would say, understand who we are.
I don't think they gave me any help in terms of like being mixed race, because I don't think obviously either of them have experience with that. They both gave me their separate advice and how to deal with obviously like anti-blackness from my dad, like, you know, all the usual, like having to work twice as hard for half and whatnot. And on my mum's side, she was a bit like, because my mum, she was like quite poor growing up, so she never had any formal schooling or anything like that. So it's more kind of like she tried to help in what way she knew how, and then she saw this quote, I think it's from Bruce Lee, because I think someone asked him like, what race are you, or what race do you consider yourself, and he said like, I consider myself like human. rather than applying an ethnicity to it. And it's like corny or cliche as that sounds, or whatever. That's the advice that she gave me to say, not very useful in a playground situation, but she tried.
It was very awkward for me. I always felt that I didn't quite fit. There was neither. I was with the white guys, and it wasn't. I'm not talking about white people. I'm talking about my own sort of age people that I knew. If I was with white guys, I upset them or something like that, there would be, you know, like either black side or whatever, a bit more colourful than that. If I was with black guys, they'd even call me a coolie. So I didn't quite fit, and all my life I kept on thinking I was like a square block trying to get into a round block.
In terms of discrimination from the dual heritage thing, I guess there's like this weird space where you're not Chinese and you're not Nigerian. Now you've got some claim to both of those, but never full claim, because obviously I'm never going to be accepted in the Chinese community because I don't look anything like Chinese. But also in the Nigerian community, you're not fully Nigerian, and like you can tell. So when I go over there, like when you first land, there'll be taxis or whatever. They'll be saying like, "Do you want a taxi?" And they'll be referring to me as like yellow man, yeah. And these people obviously I don't know. They've just seen me for the first time, yeah. But obviously they can tell from like my skin that I'm not Nigerian. So whereas over here, no one would call me like yellow or whatever because I'd just be black here. So.
When I moved to London, I felt so normal for the first time ever. So growing up, I'd always known I felt a bit, not to say special, but I did. That's the way I dealt with it. I was different, so I felt special. And I almost enjoyed standing out. I enjoyed people saying to me, "Oh, look at that lovely hair." I enjoyed, just because that's what it was. And I even enjoyed the question. Every time someone meets me, they go, "What are you? Like, where are you from?" It's just a conversation starter that I'm used to. But when I moved to London, you don't even have that anymore. Like, you're just a brown person, you know, normal. Yes, that's the difference. And because there's so many, like, you walk down the street and everybody's brown, aren't they? There's so many people in London who are mixed race, so it's just like I blend in, which I don't really like so much. I do like a bit standing out because that's what I'm used to.
Not quite knowing your part, but I don't know if there is a part. It's just very confusing. When I was younger, I wasn't sort of accepted. I think it was racism and colour and, you know, this functional life was a lot different when I was younger. But today, when I see young people, they're just like multicultural, and they're quite happy with each other. I see it a lot with the young people that I work with now, that, you know, every creed and colour is there, and they just get on. There's a difference today, I believe. So I'm quite happy that they haven't had to have gone through what I went through in the early days.
Yeah, I'd say it is positive, but that's not to say necessarily that it's like more or less positive than not being mixed race. I've just had a generally positive experience being mixed race. Partly it's because a lot of people don't hear of like Nigerian and Chinese, so there's a lot of novelty factor there. So if I was like Nigerian and I don't know, like Sierra Leone or somewhere else that people didn't find like interesting, then it might not be such a like, oh, that's cool. It might just be like, or whatever, you know what I mean? So it's partly to do with where my mum's from. But for me, it's been positive. So
I think mixed race people is now becoming so common that I think it's a good thing. I think everyone should be able to marry whoever they want, should be able to have children with whoever they want. We're going to see a lot more mixes as time progresses, and I think it's just going to become so commonplace that nobody will even ask about what your mix is, because everyone will be mixed race in the future, I think. Well, I think most people are. If you actually delve into people's heritage, they'll tell, oh, my mum's from here, my dad's from here. I think that, yeah, most people are mixed race, and I think it will become more and more common, and it'll just be less and less obvious as to what they are, because people will be just mixing with everybody. And I think it's a positive thing. I think there doesn't need to be segregation, and I think all mixed race people are almost a symbol of the dream in the flesh.
Growing up being mixed raced, there weren't any role models. at all. I didn't know any. It's probably one or two sports role models, but that's not what we're good for. So I think now it's up to my generation, maybe the one before me, to actually be vocal. That's why taking part in something like this, to me, is really important, because that's what I've always said, is there like an infrastructure. Like every culture has this history of stuff that helps them to identify themselves, and a shared history and a shared consciousness about where they come from and who they are and who their ancestors was. But because this cohort of mixed race people is relatively new, they're going to have to start building that themselves. And we are the generation, I believe, to start doing that. And that's why I think it's important that there's more things like this, and there's more of an experience for young mixed race people growing up. Because what saddens me to some degree is young people who aren't necessarily as lucky as I was in regards to my parenting and where I grew up. So I grew up in a place where there was quite a few of us, even though, you know, there's not millions, there's still a few of us. If you're mixed race and you're out in Scotland, or you're in some, you know, a smaller, a less diverse demographic, how are you going to learn about your identity if your parents, it's not their fault that they're not savvy, or they're not informed, or they're not culturally aware? If there's no infrastructure, if there's no ways to help young people find their own identity or come to terms with being mixed race, then it can damage young people. And I think that's what I'm passionate about trying to help improve, is the kind of the infrastructure to being mixed race.